The sun was setting low over Willow Creek, painting the sky in shades of fire and gold. Dust floated lazily in the evening air as Jack Rayner stood at the edge of his ranch, a worn letter clutched in his hand. The ranch, his father's legacy, his mother's pride, looked quieter than ever. Once alive with the sound of horses and laughter, now it was only silence that kept him company. The letter was an offer from a man in the next county, a generous one, enough to pay off every debt and give Jack a fresh start somewhere far from this lonely land. For months he'd been telling himself that leaving was the only way forward. But as he looked out at the old barn, the corral, and the golden fields that had raised him, something deep inside whispered that leaving meant burying a part of himself forever. Inside the barn the air was thick, with the scent of hay and the sound of restless horses shifting in their stalls. Jack ran a hand through his hair, dust and sweat mixing with regret. That's when he heard soft footsteps behind him, the sound of boots crunching gently on hay. "Didn't think you'd still be here," came a familiar voice. Jack turned around slowly. Standing in the dim light was Clara Evans, the woman who had once been his closest friend and, if he was honest with himself, something far more. Her hair, the color of autumn wheat, glowed under the slanting sunlight seeping through the cracks in the wood. She wore a simple cotton dress, her hands stained from the day's work, and her eyes carried both warmth and fire. "I thought you'd gone back to town," Jack said quietly. "I did," she replied, walking closer. "But word travels fast in Willow Creek. Folks say you're selling the ranch." Jack looked away. "Guess folks are right." She studied him for a moment, the corners of her mouth tightening. "You really think running from this place will fix what's broken inside you?" Jack let out a breath. "There's nothing left here, Clara. My family's gone. The cattle are dying. The bank's breathing down my neck. Maybe it's time I stopped fighting what's already lost." For a long moment neither spoke. The barn creaked softly, and the faint rustle of hay filled the silence between them. Clara stepped closer until she stood right in front of him, close enough for him to see the sadness flickering in her eyes. "You're wrong," she whispered. "There's still something left here." Jack met her gaze, his heart thudding like the echo of a distant drum. He wanted to say something, anything, but words failed him. Instead, he just watched her, remembering all the nights they'd talked by the fire, all the laughter that once filled these walls before grief stole it away. Clara reached out and touched his arm. "You're not the only one who lost something, Jack. You think you're the only one who hurts? You think you're the only one who stands here every morning, wishing things had turned out different?" Her voice cracked, but her eyes didn't waver. "This land raised us both. It taught us how to fight, how to love, how to hope. Don't turn your back on it, or on the people who still believe in you." Jack swallowed hard, feeling a lump rise in his throat. "And what if I don't have any fight left?" Clara smiled sadly. "Then let me fight for you." Before he could answer, lightning flickered through the cracks in the roof as a sudden storm rolled over the valley. Rain began to drum against the old wood, echoing like the heartbeat of the land itself. Jack and Clara stood frozen in the golden half-light, the storm's voice surrounding them. Then, without a word, Clara took his hand and led him toward the hayloft. The climb was slow, the air heavy with the smell of rain and earth. They reached the top where old memories lived, a place where laughter once echoed when they were young and fearless. Clara sat on the pile of hay, looking at him with a quiet strength. "You don't have to decide tonight," she said softly. "Just don't walk away without remembering what this place means. To you, to me, to everyone who loved you here." Jack looked at her, really looked, and for the first time in months, the weight on his chest began to lift. The warmth of her presence, the way she believed in him even when he didn't, struck something deep inside. He realized then that it wasn't just the ranch he was giving up. It was her. It was every piece of his heart still buried in this land. Thunder rolled outside, and the wind howled through the barn slats. Clara leaned back slightly, her eyes locked on his. "Stay tonight, Jack, just tonight. If you still want to leave come morning, I won't stop you." Jack hesitated, his heart caught between two worlds, and the one he wanted to escape, and the one that had never let him go. Slowly he sat beside her, the sound of rain washing the world clean around them. In that quiet space above the storm, two souls that had drifted apart found their way back, not through words, but through the silent understanding that some things, no matter how broken, are worth saving. As the night deepened and the storm raged, Jack realized that maybe the ranch wasn't the thing that needed saving. Maybe it was him. And maybe, just maybe, Clara was the reason he'd been given one last chance. The lantern flickered low, casting long shadows over the barn walls as he whispered, "Maybe I'll stay, just a little longer." Clara smiled in a small, knowing smile, the kind that carried both hope and love. Outside, the storm began to ease. And in that moment, Jack Rayner knew, sometimes the hardest goodbyes are the ones you never say. When Jack Rayner woke, the first thing he noticed was the smell of rain. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp coolness in the air and the soft sound of dripping water from the barn roof. The hayloft, bathed in early sunlight, looked golden and alive. For a moment he didn't move. He just lay there, his mind quiet for the first time in a long while. Beside him, Clara sat by the edge of the loft, looking out through a gap in the boards where the sun streamed in. Her hair caught the light, and she looked like a part of the morning itself, steady, beautiful, and full of promise. Jack watched her in silence, trying to memorize every detail, the curve of her smile, the way her fingers traced the old wooden beam, the way her presence somehow made even silence feel like peace. "You're awake," she said softly, not turning around. "Yeah," Jack replied, his voice still rough with sleep. "Didn't mean to doze off." She smiled faintly. "You needed it. Haven't seen you sleep that calm in years." Jack sat up slowly, running a hand through his hair. The world outside was washed clean. The hills glistened, the soil smelled rich, and the creek that ran through his land sparkled like silver. It looked alive again, and for the first time he realized how much he'd missed seeing it that way. Clara finally turned to face him. "Still thinking about leaving?" Jack didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had built fences, fixed saddles, and buried his father years ago. "I was sure I'd already made up my mind," he said. "But now, I don't know anymore." Clara climbed down the ladder and Jack followed her. Outside, the morning sun spread over the fields, touching every blade of grass like a promise. The storm had left behind puddles that mirrored the sky. Horses grazed peacefully by the fence, and the smell of wet earth hung in the air. "Look at this place," Clara said, her voice low but full of feeling. "It's still standing, still breathing. You think you've lost everything, but this land hasn't given up on you." Jack watched her, then glanced at the hills in the distance. "Maybe I gave up on it first." She walked toward him until they stood only a few feet apart. "You can rebuild, Jack. You've done it before. You've always been the kind of man who could take broken things and make them whole again." He shook his head. "It's not that simple, Clara. The debts, the droughts, every year it gets harder. Maybe this land's better off in someone else's hands." Clara's eyes filled with quiet determination. "And what about the people who believed in you? The ones who worked these fields with you, who trusted you to keep this ranch alive? You think selling it will set you free, but it'll only leave you hollow." Her words struck deep. Jack turned away, staring at the horizon where the mountains rose sharp and endless. He'd been chasing freedom his whole life. Freedom from grief, from the ghosts of his past, from the weight of his father's legacy. But now he wasn't sure freedom meant leaving. Maybe it meant staying and finding a way to heal. They spent the morning walking the land together. Clara pointed out how the rain had revived the grass, how the soil felt softer beneath their boots, how the air smelled like hope again. Each step stirred an old memory of laughter by the creek, of long summer nights, of a promise once made beneath the stars. When they reached the old oak tree at the edge of the pasture, Clara stopped. "Remember this spot?" she asked. Jack nodded slowly. "How could I forget? We buried my first horse here. You cried more than I did." She smiled, her eyes glistening. "I cried because it was the first time I saw you break. You tried to hide it, but I knew." Jack looked at her, really looked, and in that moment, he saw everything he'd been too blind to see before. All the years she'd stood beside him, through droughts and storms, through loss and silence. She had been the one constant in a life full of change. "I don't deserve you, Clara," he said quietly. Her voice softened. "Maybe not, but you still have me." The words hit him harder than he expected. It wasn't pity, it was truth. A truth that settled deep in his chest and warmed something long cold inside him. As they walked back toward the barn, Jack's mind was made up. He didn't say it out loud, not yet, but he knew. The ranch wasn't just land, it was his life. His father's hands in the soil, his mother's voice in the wind, and Clara's heart beating quietly beside it all. When they reached the barn, Jack stopped and looked around, at the weathered wood, the broken fence, the fields waiting for spring. "Guess I've got some repairs to make," he said. Clara smiled, her eyes bright with relief. "Guess you do." He turned to her, his voice steady now. "I'm not selling, Clara, not yet. Not while there's still something worth fighting for." Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She just nodded. "You made the right choice, Jack." He took her hand, rough and warm, and held it for a long moment. The silence between them wasn't empty anymore. It was full of everything that had been left unsaid for years. As the sun climbed higher, the valley came alive again. Birds sang from the fences, the creek hummed softly in the distance, and the wind carried the promise of new beginnings. Jack looked at Clara and smiled. "Maybe we should fix that old hayloft too. Looks like it's got one more story left in it." She laughed, the sound like music in the open air. "As long as it's not the last one." He grinned. "Not by a long shot." And as the two of them stood side by side beneath the open sky, Jack Rayner knew that sometimes the hardest battles weren't fought with guns or grit. They were fought with the heart. The ranch would live again, and so would he.